The ASUS Zephyrus S is a thin and powerful gaming laptop, so let's find out what's on offer and just how well it performs in this review. Let's start with the specs. There's an Intel i7-8750H CPU, so 6 cores, 12 threads with decent clock speeds. I've got 16GB of memory running at DDR4 2666 in dual channel, but there's only one memory slot on the motherboard. 8GB of it is soldered to the board and can't be changed, so you can upgrade to 24GB at most. For storage, there's a 512GB NVMe SSD in the single M.2 slot, and no space here for a 2.5-inch drive bay. There's an Nvidia GTX 1060 6GB graphics card here, which powers the 15.6-inch 1080p 144Hz panel, but it's also available with the more powerful 1070 Max-Q too. For the network connectivity, there's support for 802.11 AC Wi-Fi and Bluetooth version 5.0. There's no Ethernet port here unfortunately, so you'll need to use a USB dongle if you need one. The Zephyrus S has a metal lid with a matte and brushed finish, and the interior and base are also metal, with the exception being the plastic section above the keyboard. Overall, the laptop felt very well built and was sturdy. No sharp corners are found anywhere, and the front and side edges have this bronze trim finish. The dimensions of the laptop are 36cm in width, 26.8cm in depth, and 1.5 to 1.57cm in height, depending if you've got the laptop opened or closed. When you open the lid, the back rises up to exhaust air, and we'll see how well this keeps the components cool later. The weight is listed as 2.1 kilos on the ASUS website, right in line with what I got. With the 180-watt power brick and cable for charging, the total weight increases by 550 grams to 2.65 kilos in total. But it's worth noting that the 1070 Max-Q version has a larger 230-watt brick. As mentioned, the screen is a 15.6-inch 144Hz 1080p AHVA panel with a 3ms response time, although no G-Sync available here. AHVA is similar to IPS, so viewing angles were perfectly fine for me on any angle. The bezels are nice and thin too, around 7mm on the sides based on my own measurements, and a welcome change from the previous Zephyrus GX531. I've measured the current color gamut using the Spider 5 Pro, and my results returned 97% of sRGB, 68% of NTSC, and 74% of Adobe RGB. So it's pretty good for a gaming laptop. I'd happily use it for content creation too. At 100% brightness, I measured the panel at 336 nits in the center, with an 850:1 contrast ratio, so a little better than most gaming laptops I've tested, and overall I thought the screen looked good. I've taken a long exposure photo in a dark room as a worst case backlight bleed test, and there were random patches of bleed detected, although I couldn't actually see these with my own eyes, even in the dark room, and never during normal usage. However, this will vary between laptops. While moving the display, there was some flex, but overall it felt pretty sturdy as it's all metal, and the hinges being out towards the far corners further aided in stability. It can be opened up easily with one finger, demonstrating a fairly even weight distribution as the battery is up the front. Despite the thinner bezels, the 720p camera is still found above the display in the center. The camera is a bit blurry, while the microphone sounds alright, although it did pick up a bit of its own fan noise in the background. As you may have noticed, the keyboard is up the front like the previous Zephyrus GX501. Personally, I much preferred the design of the Zephyrus M GM501, as it still allowed us to have the touchpad down the bottom in the normal spot. But at least I guess this placement of the touchpad isn't as bad as the Acer Triton 700, which has it right up the back. Despite the placement, I had no issues using the chiclet keyboard at my desk, and it was good to type with. But it can be awkward if you use it on your lap, as there's just less space for your arms. The keyboard has 4 zones of RGB backlighting, which can be controlled by pressing the function key and the left and right arrow keys to cycle through the 5 effects. The effects are static, breathing, strobing, color cycle, and rainbow. You can also hold the function key and press the up or down arrows to adjust the brightness of the keyboard. The ASUS ROG software can also be downloaded to control these effects, and also lets you manually specify different colors for the 4 zones. The sides of the WASD keys are clear, so you can see them easier with the lighting shining through. And here's how the keyboard sounds to type with to give you an idea of what to expect. There was minimal keyboard flex while pushing down fairly hard. Overall, it felt quite solid. The air intake vents are found just above the keyboard. The power button is found up the back towards the right, while the status LEDs are found up the back in the center and can still be seen even with the lid closed. The touchpad uses precision drivers and was smooth to the touch. It has 2 physical left and right click buttons, and the touchpad itself doesn't click down when pressed. Even as I started getting used to the positioning, a mouse is still definitely preferable as the touchpad is quite small. You've got the option of pressing this button to turn it into a numpad too, which is a good use of space, but of course no tactile key feeling that you'd have with a normal numpad here. The button next to it opens the ASUS Armoury Crate software, and this lets you manage the system. On the left, there's an air exhaust vent, the power input, USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-C port, 2 USB 2.0 Type-A ports, and I admit I was a little surprised that it uses 2.0 here, and 3.5mm audio combo jack. On the right, there's another USB 3.1 Type-C port, Gen 2 this time though, with DisplayPort 1.2 and power delivery, a single USB 3.1 Gen 2 Type-A port, and air exhaust vent. On the back, there are a couple more air exhaust vents, and a HDMI 2.0 output and Kensington lock in the center, while the front is all smooth, with a groove in the center of the lid to aid in opening. Up on the lid, there's the ASUS ROG logo on the side, with a mirrored finish, and it lights up red while the laptop is powered on. Fingerprints show up easily on the touchpad, but not so much on the keyboard, and as there's no wrist rest area, overall it doesn't get too messy. Underneath, there's some rubber feet which do an alright job of preventing the laptop from sliding around while in use. Otherwise, there's no need for air exhaust vents here due to the custom cooling solution. The 2 2-watt speakers are found just under the lid. They're front-facing, and I thought they sounded very good for laptop speakers. Nice and clear with some bass. Like other ASUS laptops, it makes this noise when you power it on. Thankfully though, you do have the option of disabling this boot sound in the BIOS, or through the new Armoury Crate software, which seems to replace the old ROG Center software. The laptop can be opened up with Torx 5 and Phillips head screwdriver bits, and the process is a little more involved than usual. The bottom panel comes off by removing 4 screws. This is what gets bent and pushed down by the 2 feet in the back corners when you open the lid to allow for air exhaust. The next step was to remove the cover on the rear lip. You'll want to try and take it slow as the cover is connected with a couple of cables for the status LEDs. Once the back has been removed, you can remove the top cover. Again, being careful as it's connected to the laptop with 3 cables. Once the cables have been removed, the panel can be fully removed. And from left to right, we get access to the single M.2 slot, battery, and single memory slot. Powering the laptop is a 50 Wh battery, and with a full charge and just watching YouTube videos with the screen on half brightness, keyboard lighting off, and background apps disabled, I was able to use it for 3 hours and 20 minutes. During this test, the laptop was using the Intel integrated graphics, thanks to Nvidia Optimus. While playing The Witcher 3 with medium settings and Nvidia's battery boost set to 30 FPS, the battery lasted for 48 minutes, but it dropped to around 5 FPS when there was 10% charge left. Overall, I thought the battery was okay, at least when compared to other thin laptops in this form factor that I've tested, with the exception of course being the Razer Blade, which has a large battery. Thermal testing was completed with an ambient room temperature of 22 degrees Celsius, so expect warmer temperatures in a warmer environment. Also keep in mind there are heat pipes shared between processor and graphics, so a change in one component may affect the other. Like other ASUS laptops, this one also lets you pick between silent, balanced, and turbo modes. These are built-in profiles that increase performance at the cost of boosting fan speed and CPU TDP, and I've done my testing with all 3. Starting at the bottom of the graph, at idle the temperatures are fairly cool with silent mode, shown by the light blue bars. The gaming tests were done with Watch Dogs 2, as I find that to use a good combination of CPU and GPU. Continuing up in the green bar, with balanced mode the temperatures are fine. Once turbo mode is enabled, the CPU temperatures increase by 5 degrees Celsius, as the power limit increase allows it to perform better and run hotter as a result, shown by the yellow bar. Once the CPU is undervolted by -0.150 volts, the temperatures drop back a little, both on the CPU and graphics, shown by the orange and red bars. The stress tests were done by running AIDA64 and the Heaven benchmark at the same time, in order to attempt to fully utilize both the processor and graphics. Moving up in the graph and continuing with the dark red bar with balanced mode, we're still getting around the same temperatures. Again, with turbo mode enabled, the temperature on the CPU rises as it's able to run at higher speeds, which we'll see in the next graph. And then a pretty similar story with the minus 0.150 volt CPU undervolt applied in purple and dark blue at the top. These are the average clock speeds for the same tests just shown. Again, starting down the bottom, we can see the CPU undervolt raises the average CPU clock speed by around 400 MHz. We also see an improvement to the graphics clock speed every time turbo mode is used, as it applies a 100 MHz overclock. But as we saw in the last graph, this didn't really affect GPU temperatures. Even in balanced mode with the CPU undervolt, shown in orange, we can get better CPU performance compared to using turbo mode. And then full performance with the turbo profile and undervolt combined, shown in red. It was a similar story with the stress tests, although slightly more power limit throttling in this worst case scenario prevented us reaching the full 3.9 GHz all-core turbo speed of the i7-8750H. These are the clock speeds I got while just running CPU-only stress tests without any GPU load. As mentioned, there are 3 built-in profiles on the laptop, called Silent, Balanced, and Turbo. With the ASUS stress test running, I was actually getting lower clock speeds with the undervolt applied with the Silent profile. With the balanced profile, there was still power limit throttling with this stress test. But with the undervolt applied in red, we were able to get full performance. Even with the turbo profile, we still weren't quite able to get full CPU performance, shown in purple, until we applied the undervolt, shown at the top in dark blue. To demonstrate how this translates into performance, I've got some Cinebench CPU benchmarks here, with the older 7th gen i7-7700HQ just down the bottom for comparison. The results are close to what we saw with the CPU-only clock speeds just shown. And interestingly, in silent mode, single-core performance does appear to be negatively affected. Full performance in multi-core seems possible with both turbo mode enabled with the CPU undervolted. Here are the GPU-only clock speeds while under a graphical-only stress test. At stock with the balanced profile, with the 100 MHz overclock from the turbo profile in green, and then with the manual 200 MHz overclock shown in red. As for the external temperatures where you'll actually be putting your hands, at idle it was in the low 30s. With the stress tests running, the keyboard area was alright, getting to the high 30s, and then into the 50s up the back, and then similar results while gaming, which is perfectly fine as you won't be putting your hands up the back anyway. As for the fan noise produced by the laptop, I'll let you have a listen to some of these tests. At idle with the silent profile enabled, the fan was quiet but still audible. While gaming and under stress test, it was about the same, and around the same volume as most other gaming laptops I've tested, and then fairly loud with turbo mode enabled and the fans maxed out. Overall, the thermals were pretty good for an 8th gen i7-8750H laptop. Even in these worst case scenarios, the temperatures didn't really get that high. Low 80s at the worst, which seems to be thanks to the unique cooling solution of the Zephyrus, with plenty of heat pipes. Due to the unique cooling design, I don't think you can use it while docked with the lid closed, as air intake is above the keyboard and exhaust is from the bottom, which only opens up with the lid open. I tried to do it to see how hot it would get, but when you close the lid it goes to sleep, regardless of if you tell it not to do this in Windows, most likely by design. Finally, let's take a look at some benchmarks. We'll first cover some real-world gaming benchmarks, followed by tests with various benchmarking tools. All tests will run at 1080p with these versions of Windows 10 and Nvidia drivers. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and even at epic settings, it was still playing perfectly fine. Able to average 80 FPS with 60 for the 1% low, and then well over 100 FPS at the lower setting levels. Overwatch was tested playing in the practice range, and again easily playable at epic settings, with over 100 FPS possible here, so it was playing quite smoothly with the 1% low still above 60 FPS, and over 200 FPS averages were possible at low settings. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode and not in multiplayer mode, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the test run. It played well enough at ultra settings, almost able to average 60 FPS, but I thought that it played best with medium settings or below. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and this test was able to average just under 60 FPS at medium settings, and then in the high 80s with the lowest setting preset. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and although this is a less optimized game, it was still quite playable at ultra settings. Although for this type of game, higher FPS will be an advantage, which is why I always end up playing with very low settings anyway. CSGO was tested using the Euletical benchmark, and with all settings maxed out, the test was still averaging above 100 FPS. and just able to hit 200 FPS with all settings at minimum. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and this test always results in high frame rates with modern hardware. Even at ultra settings, we're getting 130 FPS averages, with over 180 possible at low settings. Far Cry 5 was tested with the built-in benchmark, and alright results for this test. Still above 60 FPS averages even at ultra settings here, with above 80 seen at low settings. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and although the frame rates are lower at the higher settings, I don't think this game needs a high frame rate to play, and still works alright at around high settings. Dota 2 was tested using a fairly intensive replay, so this should be a worst case scenario. These results are not the same as actually playing the game, which would result in higher performance. I did play a quick game with ultra settings just for comparison, and it was averaging around 110 FPS with not much going on. Watch Dogs 2 is a demanding game, but it doesn't need a high frame rate to play. As long as I get over 30 FPS, it plays fine, so it was perfectly playable at ultra settings, although I don't think you visually get that much extra after very high settings anyway. The Witcher 3 played alright with ultra settings, still able to average 60 FPS, but it did feel noticeably better at high settings, and still looked great, with medium settings and below getting us above 100 FPS averages. I've got a few more games covered in the dedicated gaming benchmark video if you're interested. Check the card in the top right corner. Now onto the benchmarking tools. I've tested Heaven, Valley, and Superposition from Unigine, as well as Firestrike, TimeSpy, and VRMark from 3DMark. Just pause the video if you want a detailed look at these results. All of the games tested were easily playable with good settings and decent frame rates, thanks to the i7 8750H, GTX 1060, and dual-channel memory combination. Despite being a couple of years old now, 1060 graphics are still a great option for 1080p gaming with decent settings. Though if you're after more power, the Zephyrus S is also available with the GTX 1070 Max-Q as well, which may also be a better fit for the 144Hz screen, depending on the games that you want to play. The 1060 will be fine for less demanding games like Overwatch or CSGO for example. Also expect slightly lower results if you're running the laptop in the default balanced profile or silent profile. I used the turbo profile as you can very easily enable it with the built-in software, and figured while gaming, it's likely you would want to use this mode for best performance. As we saw earlier, we've got the option of overclocking the graphics and undervolting the CPU, so let's see how this actually helps improve gaming performance. The exact same Windows updates, game updates, and Nvidia drivers were installed, so there shouldn't be any changes other than the ones listed here. Far Cry 5 was tested using the built-in benchmark. The average frame rates at ultra settings were 3.6% better compared to the turbo profile speeds, and a 3.9% improvement to 1% low. So we are able to get a little performance boost from this, though results will of course vary between games. In Crystal Diskmark, the 512GB M.2 NVMe SSD was performing very well, 3.3GB per second in sequential reads and around 2GB per second in sequential writes. There's just the single M.2 slot, and no 2.5-inch drive bay or SD card slot, so that's it for storage tests. For up-to-date pricing, check the links in the description, as pricing will change over time. At the time of recording, here in Australia, the Zephyrus S with the exact same specs featured in this video is around 2,800 Australian dollars. In the US, I was only able to find pricing for the higher tier model with the better 1070 Max-Q graphics, which was $1,800 US on Amazon. It seems to be about $200 cheaper than the Zephyrus M, which has the full 1070, and even less than the Razer Blade with same specs, but a bit more expensive than the MSI GS65. Overall, pretty competitive I think. So what did you guys think of the Zephyrus S gaming laptop from ASUS? I was most impressed with the temperatures. Even under stress test, I wasn't seeing any higher than the mid 80 degrees Celsius range. The custom cooling solution really does seem to be helping, as the i7 8750H is notoriously hot. And with some undervolting, we were able to improve performance from the usual power limit throttling almost all 8750H laptops are subject to. The cooling solution does come at the cost of the awkward keyboard and touchpad placement though. Honestly, probably the only thing I personally didn't like about the laptop. Oh, and the lack of Ethernet port. Although that seems to just be a compromise with thin laptops these days. It's not the end of the world though. If you're using it on a desk, the keyboard is still fine, but not great if you're using it on your lap. And as a gaming laptop, chances are you'll be using it on a desk with a proper mouse anyway. Just keep in mind, it looks like you'll have to have the lid open while using it. The thin bezel design is a nice improvement over the previous Zephyrus GX531, and battery life wasn't too great, but seemed fair considering the thin design. As we saw in the gaming benchmarks, the GTX 1060 is still capable of playing modern games today, but if you're after more power, it is also available with the 1070 Max-Q graphics instead. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments, and leave a like to let me know if you found the review useful. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for future tech videos like this one.